Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 255. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Butch Phelps about his new book, Stretch and Release, The Missing Piece to a More Pain-Free Life. Butch knows what pain feels like firsthand. At age 18, a car crash left him with a broken arm and a broken pelvis. By age 40, he was in such terrible shape and his back pain so severe that he had to roll out of bed in the morning onto his knees and crawl out of his car using the door handles to pull himself upright. Butch began to study muscle therapy, eventually becoming a licensed therapist and certified health coach, and developed his own stretch and release technique over the span of 20 years working in the field. Stretch and Release took 4 years to write. The end result is a book that is part memoir, chronicling Butch's own battles with pain, and part do-it-yourself guide that helps people heal themselves. In this episode, I'll chat with Butch about his writing journey, his own fight to eventually live pain-free, and his desire to empower people to take their health into their own hands, as well as a few other things. Coming up. Butch Phelps, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you, Stacey. Good to be here.
I thought what we could do today is start by talking about your new book, Stretch and Release. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about this book and what inspired you to write it.
Yeah, this book was a labor of love. I actually spent 4 years writing it. And like many authors, you start writing it and you rip it up and you start over again, you rip it up and you do this a bunch of times. And then you start to think as you start to finish it, it's like, will anyone actually read this book? And so then that little bit of fear kicks in. But what really inspired me to write the book was, I created the stretch and release technique. And that's a combination of a specific type of stretching with self-massage and a change in mindset where I could teach people how to do that. And I wanted an opportunity to put it in paper for two reasons. Number one, so it'd be easier for the reader to read it, understand it better. If they need to reread several times over, they could do that. And then number two, it's sort of like a legacy thing that once I'm done, it's there. Anybody wants to go back and see it, they can see that it was there. And that was the two major drivers of writing the book. But it was a lot of fun. Some authors talk about how difficult it was to write. I didn't find that the case at all. I had a blast doing it.
Really?
Yeah.
So how many drafts did you go through? You said you were 4 years.
Oh,
Do you have any idea?
Yes. I would say off the top of my head, at least 15 to 16 drafts. I was very lucky. My publisher, who's a small publisher, good friend of mine, she's very good at editing the books. My wife is very good at editing. And I had the two of them who edited the book. And then once we started getting into a draft that felt like it was something that could work, what I did was I picked out 2 or 3 of my most loyal clients who'd been with me for years. And I said, okay, I want to know from your perspective, does this book resonate with you as someone who's not in the business? And one of the guys, he unfortunately passed on the day after the book was published, but he did get to see it. He was doing chemo and he said, I've got nothing else to do. He said, I'll take a look at it and see what you got. And I'm like, sure. I said, give me all the criticism. I want to know what you like, what you don't like. So he sent me back a 5-page summation on my book that literally I looked at it, and my wife and the publisher, all three of us at the same time, said, we've got to rearrange some things here. And we did, and it clicked. And so I was eternally grateful to him for that. And luckily, we did get a book to him the day before he passed away. And I was so
Oh,
happy he got
yeah.
to see it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm curious if you have always wanted to write a book. Have you always been a writer? Is this something you've always done? Or was this strictly a found it later in life, needed to do this as part of something else, stumbled upon it kind of a
It was
endeavor?
more the latter. I
Okay.
never really looked at myself as a writer. I am a person of ideas, but not really someone who puts things in writing very well. And coming up from North Carolina, as my wife would say, you just don't have the English for it, you know. But I got into this late in life. I didn't get into this till I was 40 years old, and it really was to help me more than anybody else. And when I started putting these pieces together, it was a unique experience. It was like a divine intervention, to be honest with you. The people started coming into my life and things started to happen to me that it was almost like I was swept up in it and taken for the ride. It was an amazing time. So for me, it was like once I saw that, I saw how people's lives changed. And then I originally started putting things on video because I had a friend of mine who's from Amsterdam, and he originally he contacted me. He said, "I've read some of your articles. I think what you're doing is amazing. Look, can we talk?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So I got on a Zoom call with him, and he said, "Can we think we can do this over Zoom?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know. I've never done it that way. I've always done it in person." But I said, "I'm always up for trying something." And we did, and it worked. And so now on my YouTube channel, there's like 200 videos of what I do. I'm amazed. And I always say to my clients, go on the channel, do nothing but read the comments on the channel. The response that people have to it from a 15 or 10-minute video just blows me away every day. And I've been doing this for 25 years, and it just blows me away. I'm always in awe of what's happening every day, you know?
Yeah. Well, this book is mostly an endeavor to teach
Yeah.
people this
Yeah.
technique of yours, but it's also sort of part memoir
Yeah.
in a lot of respects because you include in there your own journey,
Yes.
and then as you mentioned, you had used some of your clients as beta readers, but you've also included some case
Right.
studies for your clients too.
Right.
So, but I'm curious about the memoir portion because it's one thing to write a book that says, here's this
Mhm.
thing, here's how you do it,
Right.
etc. It's quite another to say, here's my own personal journey.
Yeah.
Here's my own background. This is what I could share about me. That's in some ways harder to do
Yeah.
because it's very
Very
personal. You're
personal.
opening yourself up.
Yes.
That can we talk a little bit about that journey, that memoir portion of the
Oh
book?
yeah, yeah. For me, it was about building credibility with my reader as well as with my clients. I want them to know that I wasn't 18, 19 years old and decided I wanted to become a therapist and run into school and learn a bunch of theory and come out and, I've had this perfect body. I'm 26 years old and I'm going to teach you at 65 how to get better. And so I wanted to use that more as a credibility piece to say, look, I know what that back pain feels like. I know what it feels like to get up out of bed or to get up out of a chair and somebody like stabbing me in the back with a knife. I want them to know that I know what it feels like to be 315 pounds and losing 105 pounds, what that felt like. I wanted them to understand that I understand a little bit about what they're going through. And so too many times, and I have friends of mine who were doctors, and obviously if you're a heart surgeon, you can't practice on each other by cutting your chest open and doing heart surgery. So when they tell you this is what you're going to feel, maybe, maybe not. But if you've been there and you've had your chest cracked open, and I actually had a friend who was a cardiologist that happened to him, he calls me on the phone. He was coming back from Cleveland Clinic, and he said, if I'd have known it hurt this bad, I feel like I was lying to all of my patients. And it's like, so I wanted to be more of a credibility thing more than anything else to say, look, I understand where you are.
Take people through
Yeah.
some of that journey of yours because as you mentioned, you came to this later in life.
Yeah.
You didn't start out, you haven't always been doing this.
No.
So this you ended up here
Mhm.
because of what you've been through.
Right, right. Yeah. So I'd been in corporate America from like age 23 to like age 40. And I'd gone through a divorce in my early 30s, mid 30s, and I just started eating my emotions. I was an emotional eater. And I ballooned up. I'd always been in shape. I'd been a trainer, in my late 20s, early 30s at the gym just for extra money and extracurricular activities. But I ate my emotions and I ballooned up to like 315 pounds. And I'm like 6'4". So I looked like a wall when I walked into a room. And so I went to my doctor and I'd been to her for several years and she said, man, you're like putting on a lot of weight. So she's going through my vitals and she said, you're 37. She said, by the time you're 40, I'd be willing to put $100 down. You'll have a stroke or a heart attack. And I was like, really?
Mm.
And she had just gone back to school, studied nutrition. And she said to me, if you're willing and you're interested, I'll help you with your nutrition plans and I'll help you get this weight off. But you got to be serious. I'm going to give you a week to think about it. You call me, but you got to be serious. And so I called her back and I said, I'm in. I'm ready to go. And so she taught me how to change my mind in the relationship of food because she said it's not only important that you lose the weight, but it's also important you maintain the weight. And it worked. And I dropped 105 pounds in 18 months. Well, having been a trainer, I'm like, all right, I've lost all this weight. I got to really start to get myself back in shape and go back to the gym and work out. So I'm working out like a fiend. I'm in there every single day. Next thing I know, I wake up and I've got severe low back pain to the point it would take your breath away. And I can remember going to meetings and people would say, have a seat over there. And I laughed and I would say, no, I think I'll stand up so I can grow taller. And the reason for that was I didn't want to sit down because I'd look really bad trying to get up. So once this started happening to me, and I'd go to doctors, do the typical things everybody does, and everybody was sort of treating the symptom. And I had taken a year off after I left the corporate America job, and I went to a class called Keys to the Kingdom. It was in a small church there, and it was about decluttering your mind from mess in your mind. And I figured out that I wanted to do something to help people. Wasn't sure quite what that was, but that's what I wanted to do. And I decided to go to a massage school. And I went to the massage school. They had a rolling enrollment. And the guy said to me, well, it's a rolling enrollment. We'll get you in. He said, you know what? Instead of putting up the money up front, why don't you just take out a student loan? It'll probably take a couple of weeks to get that approved and you can get started and go from there. And I'm like, all right, that was on a Wednesday. The guy calls me on Friday and he said, you've been approved. You're in. You can start Monday. And I'm like, what? You can start Monday. And I'm like, okay, sure. So I go into this class and I remember my wife said to me, so how was class today? And I'm like, I know things that I don't know how I know them. I can't explain. I can see what they're talking about. And, and so during my school there, and keep in mind, I'd just been in school maybe 2 months. My teachers started coming to me on my breaks to get me to work on their necks, work on their back, work on their shoulders and so forth. And one teacher said to me, he said, it's almost like you're a walking MRI machine. You can just see things that other people aren't seeing. And it just started from there. And I got introduced to a man named Aaron Mattis, who had started the active isolated stretching. And I called him like 2 weeks before I graduated school. It's a 2-year degree. And he laughed. He was in New York and he said, I've been waiting on you to call me for 6 months. He said, I've been hearing about you from your teachers all along. And he said, I figured you would be giving me a call. And so he said, meet me tomorrow morning in my office at 5:30. And I said to my wife, I'm going to meet him. He's never going to have to wait on me. I'll always be waiting on him. And for 6 months, I got a chance to study with him. And I never was there less than 5:15 in the morning. I was always waiting on him. And so when I was done with him, all of a sudden I had two neurosurgeons who fell into becoming mentors of mine. One was very much into the brain, the muscle mind thing, sort of talking to me about that. And as I was working with Aaron, he said, I noticed you do massage with stretching. And I said, yeah, is something wrong with that? He goes, no, no, no. He said, I just, in 35 years, have never seen anybody do that. And as I started putting the pieces together as they were brought to me, that's what got me into creating the stretch and release technique. But I started seeing people who not only could solve their own problems by me giving them the tools to do that and teaching them how to use it, but I saw people who felt empowered. And it was nothing more fun than seeing someone who was 75, 80 years old showing me all the moves they could finally do they haven't done in years. And then I went
Right.
back to school and I took out a degree in aging science, which used to be called gerontology. And it just took me one step further into really understanding the aging process of the human body. So it's been a labor of love. It's never like going to work. It's like me going to play golf every day.
At any point while you were doing this, while you were learning all of this, and you were having these moments of thinking, this is clicking. Why is this? How do I know
Hmm.
this? Did you ever stop to think, like, it sounds sort of science
Hmm.
fictiony, right?
Hmm.
Is this am I in an alternate, did I step into an alternate universe?
Hmm.
Like, how
Yeah.
did I do this in a prior life? Like,
Yeah.
was there ever a moment where you thought, did I miss something? Should I have been doing it earlier? I'm just curious, like, what was going through your mind when you had those moments?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure at some point they were a bit jarring, a bit startling.
Yes, the great question. Great. And there was moments like that because I'd never been interested really in health beyond working out. And I thought I wanted to be an aerospace engineer when I was 18. I wound up working in the newspaper industry instead. But I always had sort of an engineering style mind about it. And as I'm going through this thing, there were many days where I thought, I just can't believe I just got to experience what I got to experience. And one of the things I did was I volunteered at a senior center here in Sarasota, and I got to work with 54 retired physicians. And I was sitting there having lunch one day. I'd been there probably for 2 weeks, and these two doctors came down and sat down beside me, and one of them said to me, "So what do you do in that room in there?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" Well, he goes, "People are coming out different than they go in." And I said, "Is that good or bad?" And he goes, "Oh, that's good." I said, "I'm just curious as to what you're doing because it's working better than what we're doing." And I said, "Well, let me show you," because I was pretty new at it. "Let me show you. It's easier than telling you." And I took him into the room. By the time I got in the room, there were six more doctors. So I had eight doctors in the room with me of different persuasions. And they were asking all kinds of questions. Some of them I knew the answers. Some of them I was just like, I don't know, you know. But it was like as they started, I started working with them and showing them, the doctors like, why don't they teach that in school? And when I started really getting in and studying that, what I realized was that we teach people how to treat symptoms and not how to treat true causes. So for me, it was really a time of, there wasn't a day that went by that I didn't say, wow, getting into my car going home. Yeah, it was
Mm.
an unusual experience.
Part of what you talk about in the book is this idea of
Hmm.
muscles being not just physical, but also
Hmm.
emotional, or having that sort of kind of emotional component. I'm curious because, once again, that sounds a little sci-fi
Yeah,
ish
yeah,
when you if you just take it on its
yeah,
face. Can you delve into
yeah.
that a little
Yeah,
bit?
I can. It When I started learning about it, I felt the same way. It's a little sci-fi-ish here, because I was never one of those touchy-feely kind of guys. But as I started to look at it, and you think about the fight or flight response that our body has, people talk about muscles as having a memory. They talk about muscles as they're fighting against them, as if the muscle itself has some sort of a brain attached to it. When you look at the muscles of the human body, there's somewhere around 653, depending on what study you read. Some will go as low as 640, some will go as much as 703. But usually 653 is the number most people talk about. When you look at the muscles of the human body, it's really just reactive tissue. I mean, we don't have 653 little brains in our body. And the important part about that is that with the fight or flight, if you're in a building, it's on fire, and your brain is like, oh my God, Stacey, we got to get out of here. And if your legs had brains in it, the legs would go, well, I don't feel like doing it today. And so you're stuck. So the brain has to be in control to get you out of trouble. That's its whole job, keep you alive. And so when you start looking at it from that perspective, when people are stretching, for instance, we hear people talk about lengthening your muscles. We're going to lengthen them. They're never going to get any longer than they naturally are. I mean, it's not like the muscles in your leg one day would fit a basketball player that's 7 feet tall. What happens there is that from the mind then reacts, and as it reacts to things, whether it's perceived or reality, the muscles react along with that. So if you're upset with somebody, you're rigid, you're tight, you're ready to fight. But if you're having coffee with a friend, your relaxed muscles are soft. Okay. What changed? Your state of mind. But the state of your muscles changed drastically with that. So when you start to understand that and you start to see that side of it, when we get into stretching, if I'm pulling hard, and I get this with new people all the time when they come to my office, if I'm pulling hard like I'm pulling taffy, thinking that it's just the muscle fighting with me, then I'm missing the boat and I'm strength training as I'm calling it stretching. Whereas if I realize that what I really want to do is release the tension, Now I understand that I have to release the tension in my mind to get the tension in the muscle to release. And when it does, what you find is stretching is far less painful. It's far less work. And your body just feels amazing when you get done because your mind is relaxed with your body. Yeah.
Right, right. So almost meditative if you
Yes.
can get it
Yeah.
right.
Yes. That's exactly right.
Hmm. So I'm curious for someone who admitted previously that they had more of an engineering style
Yeah.
mind, how easy or difficult was it for you to, one, to grasp onto this
Mhm.
understanding? Was it all mental or was it more sort of, and again, and sort of an emotional
Mhm.
understanding? And then two, how easy or difficult was it to begin communicating it effectively to people?
Well, the first part was much easier than the second part. The first part, understanding it from an engineering standpoint, I used to tease my dad because he said, when you were a kid, you want to be an engineer. And I said, well, I am an engineer. I'm a muscle engineer. From an
Mm,
engineering standpoint, when you start to look at like a skyscraper, how you're building a skyscraper, of course, you start with the foundation so the skyscraper doesn't wiggle and fall over. You understand the muscles is a basic part of that foundation to the human body for balance and mobility. So that part was pretty easy. And being able to see that was pretty easy for me to see. Explaining that to people in the beginning was very difficult because I wasn't quite sure what was going on either. I'm learning this thing, I'm hearing these things from people who are far smarter than I am. And as I'm looking at it and I'm trying to get that message across, and that was part of the reason for the delay it took so long to write the book, was how do you get the right words to get somebody to visualize what you're saying, you see? And so that's what took a long time to do that. And it took me a long time because I'm trying to wrap my head around how can I say this that makes sense that doesn't somebody doesn't say this guy's off his rocker. And so
right,
the
right.
first time one of the neurosurgeons who happened to be the chief doctor at the senior center, she said to me, we're having a meeting on Thursday with the doctors. There's about 40 or show up. And she said, we want to talk about the spine and I want you to lead that talk. And I'm thinking, I'm a massage therapist. I don't even belong in that room. You know what I'm saying? But what was funny was I get into this room and we start talking about the spine, and I'm talking to them about how the muscles create the compression on the spine, but how the muscles, like in the lower body, cause the pelvis to tilt forward or backwards. That increases the curve in the spine. The head forward or backwards increases the curve in the neck. How that contributes to the compression on the disc, leading to bulging disc, herniated disc, and pinched nerves. I was amazed because when I was done after 30 minutes, I had doctors coming up with their x-rays and their MRIs on their phones asking my opinion as to what was wrong with them. And in fact, two or three of them wound up becoming clients. And I mean, it was a very intimidating moment, but it taught me a lot going through that.
In going back to the book for a moment,
Mhm.
I'm curious. It seems like for something like this, it would be much easier to just say to people, "Let me just show you."
Yes.
Lie down, let me show you, or create a video that says, "See how I'm doing this here. See what this person is doing. See
Right.
this." That seems like it would be a much easier way to communicate it. How do you do that in the book? How do you show,
Yeah.
quote unquote, on paper what it is that you're trying to do?
So I use a lot of examples of, you know, it's like when you think about your car, you think about buildings. When I talk about the calves, I talk about the feet. And you think about a skyscraper, the most important piece is the foundation because that foundation then controls what happens to the top floors of that building. So when you're looking at the feet and you're looking at the calves of the human body, the muscles in the feet, they're like 29 muscles, 33 joints there. You've got four calf muscles and muscles in between with the two bones in the lower leg. That group of muscles is actually what keeps you from falling down with balance. And it actually gives you mobility. If you don't have them in the right place and they're not working the right way, can lead to back pain and neck pain and just from the feet and the calves. And I always say to people that the calves and the feet are the most important part of the human body to really maintain flexibility because without that, you're going to have a problem with mobility and a problem with balance. And so I try to use things that people can visualize. When people ask me about strength training and stretching, and they'll say, you're saying stretching is more important. I go, no, 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 no. Think about your car. So think about strength training as the fuel you put in your car for power. Stretching is the flexibility or the lubrication, like the oil you put in the engine. Which one can I leave out of your car so it'll continue to run? And most people go, well, you can't leave either one out. I go, the same thing is true for the human body. So I try to put it in terms and words that people can associate with other things in their life to kind of get a picture on that. And it takes a little bit of time, even with people who come in to my office and we're working on them there. What I do usually I'll say to them, give me 3 visits a week apart. And they go, really? And I go, well, we got to change. And when we're changing your mindset, but I'll show them 2 or 3 stretches to do that's going to give them the most help the first time, send them home with videos they can follow. And when they come back, I have them to demonstrate those stretches to me. And what I've learned over time is there's always little nuances there that you tweak it and all of a sudden, boom, they take off and they're ready to roll. Now you get some people, it's kind of funny because you'll give them the videos, we've gone through it, I've taught them how to do it, they'll go home. And even though they were complaining that my physical therapist or my trainer or whatever I was doing wasn't working at all, I'll say, well, show me what you're doing. And they'll go back to do exactly what those people taught them how to do. And it's just the funniest thing. And I'm like, well, I thought you said that didn't work. And they go, well, it doesn't work. And I go, well, why are you doing it? I don't know. And so it is funny. So it's an interesting conversation either way.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you were trying to compile this book, get a draft that worked, taking all this feedback in, I'm curious if along this journey, if there were surprises that you had in writing this, things that you found to be challenges that you didn't realize would be a challenge, things that you found, oh, well, that's pretty easy. I didn't realize that was easy enough to do. That message got across. I'm just curious if in writing this book, the experience was what you thought it would be looking back on it now, or was it just one surprise after another?
Well, it wasn't the process I thought it was going to be, because I thought it was going to be miserable. um, and I'm thinking, everybody kept saying, you need to write a book. And I go, I need to write this book. And it's going to be, I've listened to authors and they go through, they're like crying and they're on the floor. And it's like, this is going to be terrible. What I did find out was I found my best writing was at 5 a.m. in the morning. And I'd get up at 4:30 or 5 in the morning and I would write for an hour to 2 hours at a time. And the challenging part wasn't so much the back end where you've got the specific stretches for like the back, the neck and shoulders and that kind of thing. The challenge was more on the front part. Why is this book important? What is the process? How to get people to be able to read that and visualize what I'm saying. And that's what led me, as I'm writing and writing and writing, and it's like, they're never going to understand what I'm saying. They're never going to understand. And it wasn't like I was using $50 words. I mean, I always, even in my speaking days, what I thought of is that you always want to use 5 cents words so that no matter who's in the audience, they know what you're saying. And so my focus was how to get this to where everybody's going to understand what I'm saying, whether they're a doctor or it's a person who's never been to a doctor. And that was part of the reason for bringing in the clients to say, okay, from your perspective, what do you see here? And even a couple of friends who've not come to see me, I'd say, read this and see if you understand what I'm saying. That was probably the most challenging part of the whole book. But I can't say that the experience was bad. I look forward to getting up each day and doing it.
Yeah. I mean, what you were saying there reminds me of in practicing law, it was always the idea of, stop using legalese so much, just use plain English to describe something that is very technical, very dry, and put it in terms that still could not be misinterpreted.
Right.
Very, very plain, but could not be misinterpreted. Right. I imagine doing something like this, very, very similar, as you mentioned, right? Yeah. You're talking medical terms, you're talking about things that probably need very specific language, and yet you can't use necessarily language that not everybody knows or understands. Right. So how do you How do you use everyday words for something that requires something incredibly detailed and specific?
So one of the things but when the first time I gave a talk on what I do, and I was giving a talk on plantar fasciitis, and there was probably 25, 30 people in the room, and there were circular tables. There was an older lady sitting in front of me there, and she listened. The talk went on for about an hour. She comes up to me and she says to me, "Sir," she goes, "I enjoyed your talk. It was very animated. It was a lot of fun. It was all these other things." She goes, "I just have one question." I said, "What's that?" She goes, "What is plantar fasciitis?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you've been sitting here for an hour and had no idea what I was even talking about, you know?" So what I did was when I would say things like plantar fasciitis, I go, that pain in your heel. Instead of saying something is medial, it's on the inside, or lateral, it's on the outside. If it's distal, if it's, inferior, superior, instead of using those words, I would use more common words that people could come into. I would use the names of the muscles when I talk to people, but I always would say things like the quads, the quadriceps, they're on the front of your thighs. Okay. I never would just say, "Oh, your quads, you got to stretch out your quads." Because I've had people bring me MRIs and they would say to me, "What does this mean?" It's like Chinese. "What does this mean?" And I'd go word by word and explain it to them what they're looking at. I think that for so many people, we get caught up in the things we're educated in, and we forget about that the person we're talking to who's never been to law school or never been to medical school, any healthcare school, anything like that they know exactly what we're talking about. And they really don't. And I've just been amazed that people who were even college educated would bring me MRIs and they were like, "I can't understand a word beyond his name. I don't know what he said." And I would go
Right,
through.
right. Yeah, I don't speak that language.
No, no. And it could be Chinese as far as they were concerned. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So now that you've written this book, is it something you would ever consider doing again?
I will. I will. Actually,
Oh,
what I'm doing now is I'm building online courses. I've had a lot of people from my YouTube channel and various things that I've done is ask about me doing digital courses. So I'm starting to do digital courses. But yeah, I do see another book coming. And it's going to be, my wife is a retired dietitian. We may do something on nutrition, make a little more nutrition in the next book, but we'll take it to the next level for that. Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah.
Good, good. Well, if people want to learn more about you and the technique and look for, things that you have going on, wait for the new release, that sort of
Yeah.
thing, where can they go to find you and that
Best place to
information?
find me is at musclerepairshop.com. They can also, if they want to see what I do, they can go to my YouTube channel, The Muscle Repair Shop. There's about 205, 210 videos there they can watch to their heart's desire. I'm starting a Substack, which I've just got started, a Substack newsletter as well. From my website, they can actually sign up for a free weekly newsletter that actually comes with 2 or 3 videos. So what I do is I get into talking about a specific ailment, what causes it, why the traditional treatments usually fall short, and then how to actually fix it, and then give you 2 or 3 videos of the stretches to solve that problem. Probably the best places to get me. To get the book, The Stretch and Release, is on Amazon right now. And you can go there and just look up Stretch and Release and it'll pop right up. And you can go there and get it from there. Yeah. And there's also an
Excellent.
ebook of that as well, not just a regular hardback. So there's also an ebook if you prefer that.
Good, good. Well, Butch, I want to thank you very much for joining me
Thank
today
you.
on the
Thank you.
podcast. And I want to wish you luck with Stretch and
Yes.
Release. And whatever's coming next, we will look forward to that.
Yes.
So, congratulations on everything you've accomplished so
Thank
far.
you.
Best of luck with the rest of your writing
Thank
journey.
you. Thank you, Stacy. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you again.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, Browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the bookshop at the end of the internet.